And hello, welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am your host, Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussing the deeper and giving you a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that so many people face, from systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us to better understand and address the challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. The recent wave of federal employee layoffs and mass deportations has created a ripple effect of uncertainty across several industries. With federal employees facing deferred resignation offers, probationary employee terminations, and ongoing legal challenges, significant confusion as well as economic strain has followed. At the same time, mass deportations are leaving industries who are dependent upon immigrant labor grappling with labor shortages as well as rising costs. Legal battles are continuing to unfold, and the effects on the workforce and the broader economy, they still remain far-reaching. Helping us further understand the full scope of these disruptions and their legal implications, we're joined by the founding partner at the Boyd Law Group, Patrick J. Boyd. And Patrick, good to have you. It took me a few minutes to unpack this and get this out because there's so much happening. It literally and figuratively is a tongue twister. But talk to me about this from a legal perspective. Unprecedented in many sorts.
That's right. That's right. 2 days ago, President Trump hit his 50 days in office benchmark. We know President Kennedy was famous for his 100 days set of goals and accomplishments. And within those 50 days, it seems that there are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 government workers with their jobs impacted, rendered insecure, or worse, all by virtue of a whole host of actions to decrease the size of, or even maybe claimed intention to decrease the existence of certain departments, including the Departments of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense. Recently, just yesterday and today, there was a lot of discussion about the Department of Education. And I think in this context, sort of in the social justice context, Daren, it's important to note that a lot of our government workers sort of made a trade. They decided oftentimes to accept less dollars for their jobs in exchange for the opportunity to work for and serve us as the people who live in this country, but also in exchange for maybe a greater stability in their jobs. That stability in government roles is something that seems to be impacted and being lost, and there's a lot of people nervous about it, and it's not all good, I suppose is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Let's unpack some numbers here. Department of Veteran Affairs, more than 1,000 employees with less than 2 years of service laid off. Now, when we look at people with less than 2 years of service, we always know the old adage, last one hired, first fired, but in this case, 1,000. When we look at the numbers that are numbers of people being laid off, some are in that confusion because we understood that some were told to submit their resignation. Others then decided to turn around and say, no, I'm not going to resign. So give us a little breakdown as to where we are here, particularly when it comes to the Department of Veteran Affairs.
Yeah, well, it depends on the institution. With respect to some of the workers, they were given this opportunity to take a sort of a package to resign, right? And then it was later determined that that package or the pressure of that package was inappropriate. But some of them had already opted to take the package by the time the ruling came around. And there's really sort of three unique encumbrances or complications that make it not just the possibility that people are losing their jobs, but the uncertainty of it. One, some of the institutions being impacted are institutions that are established and are supposedly only being able to be disbanded by congressional action. So it's questionable as to whether President Trump can act the way he has with respect to certain entities like the Department of Education. Then two, certain entities have unions, and those unions have contracts and notice provisions that prohibit or at least require some meaningful notice and negotiation as to layoffs and terminations. And then finally, and Letitia James from New York is one of the important pillars of this, certain local attorneys general are taking action with respect to these terminations and layoffs for particular states because when you're laying off government workers, that impacts the budget of the state. The budget has to be allowed to anticipate more unemployment, more benefits needed, the loss of services and the way to replace those services. So there's a lawsuit now challenging a lot of these actions based upon the notion that because it is actually the government surprising the government, that is the federal government surprising the state government isn't prepared, and there's laws that are supposed to allow that state government to be prepared.
Yeah.
So to your point, Daren, a lot of people are unsure, and a lot of people have surely lost their jobs and are unhappy.
Yeah. You spoke about New York State Attorney General Letitia James, her and Alvin Bragg, of two of 51 who've been across the country who've lost their state clearance as a result of Doge, Elon Musk, and following the president's directives. We'll continue to keep that and bring that up to you in another segment, but I do want to tackle this. From a legal perspective right now, you talked about the courts and going into court and whether or not there are jurisdictional rights, things of that nature. Talk to me about the process right now, because you talk about entering into court, those persons who have entered into a court fight and litigation against these layoffs. How long do we see this process taking place?
I think it's a great question without an easy answer, as most great questions are, right? I think that some of the determinations, like the determination as to whether or not it was appropriate to offer certain packages, are being overturned quickly. But I think the most of them, that is the vast majority of them, are going to take some time to unravel in the court system. Our judges work hard and they are bright, but often they are underpaid and often they are overwhelmed by the amount of work they have. So I think it's going to take some time for us to understand some of the ramifications. An interesting political point on that issue is something like the following. The Department of Education, which I think they announced about 1,300 layoffs recently, which is a big, it's 230 billion under the Department of Education, 1,300 people losing the position. What they did was they let people go, told them they were let go, and then told them that they couldn't return to the office.
Right.
So whether or not all of those terminations are lawful is one thing, but what is immediately the case is that people don't have their jobs and they don't have a place to go to work, and some of them can't even get their personal effects out. So the ultimate legality of this is unfortunately going to come potentially much later than the actual impact upon some of these dedicated government workers, and that instability is challenging. I do understand, and I think some people thinking about it do understand that there's an argument that goes from the administration's perspective that you have to be aggressive in order to combat the bureaucratic process. I think the unfortunate reality, though, is that just regular working men and women serving our country and the government are being stuck in the crosshairs of this political statement.
Yeah. I mean, you say aggressive, Patrick. I understand what aggressive means. I don't think aggressive means 5,400 probationary workers terminated. I don't think that,
Right.
and we're talking there the Department of Defense. We're talking about the Department of Homeland Security, 405 probationary workers terminated, including key FEMA personnel, CFO, program analysts, grant specialists. Not going to even mention, talk about air traffic controllers. We're not even going to talk about TSA. I mean, there literally is this shakeup amongst the federal government that is impacting Americans. But let's just boil down for a moment. Before we talk about the American population, let's talk about the individual. I mean, I just mentioned right here, we're talking about close to 10,000 people just right here. And for those of you that know anything about federal government, know anything about working in Washington, D.C., or been to Washington, D.C., you would understand that this is an literal emptying of the House.
That's right. That's right. Offices closed, physical plants being locked, including at the Department of Education, and people who had never been told they were doing anything other than a great job, being told on Monday, welcome, we're happy to have you here at work. Please keep up the good work. And on Tuesday, you don't have a job, don't come in. Good luck with your mortgage and your kids, your groceries, and those kinds of things.
Right. From a legal perspective, we understand a court overturns. President makes an executive order, court decides, hey, doesn't happen, it becomes overturned. What recourse does the president have after that executive order is overturned? Is it dead, done, away with? Or is there something that we are just kicking the can down the block a few minutes?
I think it's a good question. Again, without a particularly easy answer, he could revise an executive order to try to satisfy the standards. But I think the practical implication is, let's just think about it this way: if you're a talented worker for the Department of Education and you care about this mission and you care about what you're doing for the educational system of these United States, and you've been there 10 years and you had a job on Monday and you lost the job on Tuesday, if your opportunity to come back to work because the president's authority was improperly executed returns and you have a job to come back to maybe in 3 months, you may have gone ahead and found another job and may not be terribly interested in coming back. And as a result, this country will have lost a dedicated, hardworking, talented person working for the government. So to your point, those personal lives are being impacted, but the lives of all of us who are served by these government workers are going to be impacted because we're going to lose talent for sure.
Yeah. We talked about people losing their jobs. I want to take it a step further. I was in the airport lounge the other day, sitting next to a gentleman who was talking to somebody about the work that's going on, that he's got going on. And he referred to the fact that he lost 2 or 3 people due to ICE and the mass deportations that are going on. And his response typically, was pretty straightforward. He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to make it. These guys were great, and I don't have anybody that I can depend on. And when we talk about these mass deportations, that's a microcosm of a macrocosm.
Yes, yes, absolutely true. The industries that seem to be most likely to be impacted, at least in our home state here of New York, are hospitality and construction, both obviously important industries for purposes of the growth and success and enjoyment of New Yorkers in the city. The challenging part, and you sort of have to unpack it. Historically, the law has always been tough on immigration. That is, there are laws on the books that say that people employing unlawful or undocumented workers, I should say, right? People employing them can be subjected to penalties up to, I think it's $3,000 per worker, and can even be charged with a crime for employing those workers. But traditionally speaking, those laws were put in place and enforced only in the sense that they were designed to make sure that people were complying with their obligations to try to gather documents and secure assurances as to the employability of their employees, right? Now the political announcements make it seem like there's going to be a far greater enforcement. And as a result, 2 things are happening. First, certain undocumented workers are choosing not to come to work, meaning that we don't have construction being done and we don't have the support and hospitality that we need. And second, business owners don't know what to do. They don't know what the law is. And frankly, when they call us asking, we represent several restaurants and industry, hospitality sort of businesses. They call and they say, what are we supposed to do? And our best answer is, we don't really know what the ramifications are. And I think that that's really the biggest challenge is the uncertainty does not help business, does not help people, and is not terribly great for the state of New York, I guess is the best way to put it.
I think you bring up a good point. If somebody's picked up, we don't know. They don't show up for a couple of days, don't know if they're coming back, don't know. A business owner is actually stuck. Do I keep this person on? Do I move on and replace? But that affects the lifeblood of the business, and a lot of people are really being affected in this, in this kind of way. This is something that pretty much, unless you're an immigration lawyer, if you're just that business owner, you're kind of stuck out there.
That's right. That's right. And you could have 20 or 30% of your workforce where you don't know if they're coming or not. So that makes it hard to do work tomorrow, right? But it makes it even harder to predict the possibility of doing work 6 months from now. Are you going to have the team to build those new houses, that new building, fix that pothole, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Are you going to have that team to host that wedding that you were supposed to host, or to provide support for that that confirmation party or bat mitzvah or whatever it happens to be, right? It makes it challenging when you have that percentage of your workforce. And I don't think anybody would dispute that a great deal of the businesses in New York and our great city here rely upon the labor of many people who are talented and hardworking, and none of whom were documented. It's just the truth.
Yeah. Talking to a top official working in the hotel industry, and they shared with us that a lot of workers that come and that we see in our hotels are actually here. They're here on doing service, and they do service, and then they go back home. But the reality is, there's a good chance that hotel service could possibly be interrupted with all of these mass deportations that are occurring. And the bottom line is the economic toll, because there's a huge economic toll that's going to be played out when all of this really breaks.
Right. That's exactly right. And a lot of people are scared, and a lot of people are hurting, and I don't know how that's ever good. But the hope is that there will be like Letitia James and other lawyers and zealous advocates pushing for the right outcomes, and also just prompt outcomes, so that we can all focus on how to continue to operate well, and so we can have the optimism for success that's gonna keep us all keep everybody working, keep everybody happy, and keep everybody safe and healthy.
I kind of touched on this a little while ago, and you brought up the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James. She, along with 19 other attorney generals, did file a lawsuit arguing that the administration violated labor laws by failing to provide advance notice. How do we see this playing out? Eddie, I know that's up to the judge, but how do we see this playing out in terms of time frame? And if there is this situation where, the judge rules in favor of the attorney general, I think you mentioned earlier, that doesn't mean that everybody's in the free and clear. That means that we can come back in another way and reshape an order in a different type way.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, the outcome seems to be, and there's multiple claims being adjudicated, but the outcome would seemingly be a determination that the requisite notice was not given. So as to that suit, the ultimate outcome would not be that people wouldn't be losing their jobs, but rather that there would be a delay and a transition for that loss of job. So at least in that context, it's just a delay of the implementation of the administration's goals, not a denial of the administration's ability to take that step. With something like the Department of Education, just as an example, the law is a little bit more difficult or challenging for the administration. Trump has proclaimed an intention or a desire to do away with the Department of Education in full, and it's not clear under the law whether he can do that without congressional approval on the subject. It's a fascinating thing too, because this kind of cuts across political lines. If you look at the Department of Education, its conception or its sort of current structure was under President Carter, a Democrat. Then it was much maligned under President Reagan as being bloated. But then President Bush, with the No Child Left Behind methodology, which was amended and presumably improved under Obama, was a champion of it. So both Republicans and Democrats have looked at the Department of Education as having a value and an import. And seemingly the goal at this point is to do away with it in full, which would cut across both parties' lines in terms of the bipartisan support for that organization.
Yeah, a lot of things to look at. We talked about the economics, we talked about business, we talked about going to court, but I do want to go back to employers for a moment, because if employers do take these risks, because if you're dealing with undocumented, the reality is every employee that has an undocumented under their roof right now is at risk. And some of the risk that's included fines up to $3,000 per worker, 6 months in jail, and then also payments that are made off the books could now result in tax evasion charges. And of course, we know that ICE raids continue at a record pace. And so for an employer that's out there, you got to worry about bringing people through the door. But now you also have to worry about whether or not immigration is coming through the door as a result of all that's going on. So it's not really a good season for employers as well as for employees too.
Yeah, I think that's right. And obviously, when it comes to legislation of this stripe, right, it's always going to be more adversely impactful for the smaller businesses, right? Because the bigger businesses, they've got the lawyers, they've got the lawyers, they've got the reserves, they've got the opportunities to just redirect or reassign or restructure in ways that can address things. But if you're a small business in construction, if you're a small restaurant, which are wonderful businesses for the city of New York, you can very much be paralyzed by this. It's hard to know what to do tomorrow. It's even much harder to know what to do 3 months from now when you don't know if you're going to have your staff, you don't know if you're going to have your team, and you don't know what that team's going to look like. And so I don't see it as anything other than a restraint on the ability of businesses to succeed, which is just not great for the city of New York, which is still, I would argue, at least rebounding from the COVID.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. Patrick J. Boyd, who's the founding partner of the Boyd Law Group, my brother, it's always good to have you and to share
Always a pleasure.
great to have you in the conversation. Of course, you'll be back with us to break some more stuff down real soon, but thanks for being with us, Patrick Boyd.
Thank you so much.
All righty, we are taking a quick break. We'll be back with more coming up. This.
19.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, this is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
For many Bronx residents, contact with the criminal legal system could have lasting consequences that go way beyond the legal courtroom. From housing instability to immigration risks, as well as family separation, the impact of an arrest could be a life-altering event, even if there is no conviction. By addressing the root causes of justice involvement and challenging systemic inequities, the Bronx Defenders reshape how low-income communities are represented in the legal system. Joining me now, the Managing Director of Policy at the Bronx Defenders, Brittany A. McCoy. How's everything going?
It's going well, busy but well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing. I want to go right here because I talked about this in the intro here, that if a person is not convicted, right? You have a person that's not convicted, everyone says, okay, well, that's good. You're not convicted. You're in the free and clear. But the reality is you're not always in the free and clear.
Right.
There's so many things that happen as a result of not being convicted. So for the average person that may not be so familiar, because they'll sit in a place of no shade ignorance, right?
Yeah.
And say that, hey, it's all good. The person it did happen, but there's a lot to that.
Yeah, so there's a lot to that. One, when you talk about someone who's been impacted by the system, right? You have someone who has been arrested but not convicted, so they don't have anything on their criminal record saying that this was a conviction. But what happens during the process is there are so many things that happen in your day-to-day life that just you being arrested can impact. Meaning, say you get arrested in New York City and you're taking to Rikers Island, right? You're missing a day of work. Possibly, if you have children that you need to be able to pick up from school, you're not able to pick them up from school if you don't have someone who's able to go get them. All of those things can impact how you're able to navigate through society, because you can then end up with an ACS case. You can then end up with losing your job. You can end up with losing your housing just off of being in Rikers for one day or for 2 days, because the system isn't made for it to be sustainable in that way. So just being able to getting arrested, that it doesn't have to be a conviction. Just arrested in general can have such a deep impact.
In many cases, being arrested, you could get the same impact of
Yes.
actually being convicted. Not to mention the
Yeah.
fact that if my arrest was bogus, if my arrest was thrown
Right.
out, that yet and still, when it comes time to answer a question on the application, have you ever been arrested?
Yep.
You have to answer that.
Absolutely, you have to answer that. And there are many people who will get in the job application process and will say, you know what, if I have to answer this question again, I don't even want to deal with it, right? I don't even want to have to continue to relive this situation, because when we look at someone being arrested, we think because since there's no conviction, it wasn't traumatic. It is a very traumatizing experience for someone to go through the prison system, to go through jail, to being arrested, going through all of those things. So when they have to then revisit that with just checking off a box on a job application, it's very traumatizing for someone.
What would you say are some of the other collateral consequences that come as a result of this?
Absolutely. So kind of going back to what I was answering in the first question, there are so many different consequences that people are happening to people based off of just an arrest. Meaning, again, if you're getting arrested and you have children, right, you can have an ACS case being brought against you. If you are, have a full-time job or a part-time job, you're working, you don't want to miss those checks. You want to make sure, especially not in this economy, right? Like
Right.
all of us at some point in time are almost like one paycheck away from housing instability. So when you have that situation where people are going through this process and they can lose out on income, they can lose out on their housing, they can lose out on being able to take care of their children, especially in this day and age with immigration, right? If your immigration status can be compromised, like all of these things can happen. So it just has so many collateral consequences that we see every single day at the Bronx Offenders.
Yeah. We have a lot of conversation on the show about bail and bail reform. We know that bail reform is still being called for.
Yes.
We saw some aspects of bail reform that have been quite positive. We also understand that there's some that still face some challenges. The impact of bail and cash bail right now, what are you seeing from, the court system?
Yeah, so I think just taking a step back, when we talk about bail reform, because I think people hear this word and they think this scary thing, right? They hear this word and they say, oh, well, bail, like you should just be able to post bail. If you're able to post bail, you'll just be able to get off. It's no problem. We have something in this country called due process, right? And when you have due process, you want to make sure that you're able to fight your case from a standpoint that allows you to be able to present the best argument. Meaning, most people, if you're poor in this country and disproportionately black or brown, usually we are not able to afford the bail that is being presented against us. When you have a higher income and you're able to afford that bail, you statistically have a better chance of being able to fight your case from the outside than someone who is fighting their case from the inside. Meaning, when you're fighting your case from the inside, say a Rikers Island or something of that nature, you have limited access to your attorney. You have limited access to your counsel, because at the Bronx Offenders, it's not just about attorneys. You have legal advocates, social workers, et cetera, that help you during that process. But when you are fighting your case from the outside, you have more access to those resources that allow you to be able to, one, have a better fight, because when you're behind bars, a part of prison and jail it's made to break you down. So when you're outside and you're able to have the stability and the support of your family and the resources that are around you, it makes a big difference.
We talked about bail, but bail is tied to arrest again. We go back to that dreaded word again, right? Arrest. But we know in the Bronx there's a lot of challenges right now. We're hearing a lot of people speak up about unlawful arrests.
Yes.
And they're questioning unlawful arrests. We're seeing more videos, but I mean, with the emergence of cameras, you're going to see more videos.
Yes.
But the reality for so many people is they find themselves on the other side of unlawful arrest. And if it doesn't get to an arrest, the stop and frisk.
Right.
And I've been doing this job for a long time. I'm probably dating myself when I say that I was here when stop and frisk was probably initiated under the Giuliani administration, right? And there we saw like things began to change in the atmosphere in local communities simply because of a heightened stop and frisk.
Yeah.
What are you seeing for the Bronx when it comes to stop and frisk? Because there's some numbers here.
Yeah, so you're not dating yourself, because I actually got started in this work because of stop and frisk. So what I mean by that is I got started in this work around the age of 16 years old. I went to Wings Academy High School, a little bit far from here, but in the Bronx. And what I saw on a day-to-day basis during my time in high school was these unconstitutional stops and frisks, right? And there was just a city council hearing about this in December, looking at what stop and frisk, what we call stop and frisk 2.0, looks like right now. Meaning that stop and frisk has been named unconstitutional, right? So it's illegal, it's not supposed to happen. However, there are ways for police officers to be able to circumvent the system, which is what we've been seeing. Meaning, you may have heard about this, the gang database. When we talk about the gang database, and there was a city council hearing about this a few weeks ago, that gang database is 99% black and brown. Meaning that 99% of the people on that database are black, are brown, are from low-income communities, etc. You don't see the Proud Boys on there. You don't see any of these like other, not black or brown, quote unquote, gangs that they would consider on that database. So I bring that up because police officers use this database as a stop and frisk 2.0 to say, we have you on the database. That's why we need to stop you. Or we have you on the database. That's why we're interested in having a conversation with you, because we're concerned about your gang activity. But what it takes to even get on the gang database is minimal. You can live in a certain neighborhood. You can have friends from a certain place. You can say something on social media, and people don't know that they're on the database. That's a really big part of this as well. And there are children as young as 13 on this database who have no knowledge, and we can't pull the information. Not even as lawyers and advocates, we can't pull this information. So when we talk about stop and frisk, we don't talk about it necessarily in the same unconstitutional way, but there are more ways that are being developed to do that work.
How do we get around this here, and not even get around this, how do we defeat this here for somebody who's saying, listen, this is crazy. Like 99% of the people are from communities of color. We talk about low-income neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
We talk, we know what the numbers are suggesting. How do we get around this from a place where, as you know, a policy director for the Bronx Defenders, we address it, and we call more attention to it? How do we do that?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of twofold, right? So for me, you have policy power and you have people power. On the policy aspect, you have a bill that is currently out in City Council that's sponsored by the wonderful council member Althea Stevens. It's about abolishing the gang database. We want to make sure that people know about that and support that. We know that there are many advocates in the space who support that piece of legislation, and we want to make sure that it's passed. We also have people power, right? People speaking up about their stories and how this impacts them matters, because what the system essentially wants people to do is be quiet, right? And not talk about what's happening and not talk to each other and not have these conversations. So when we have these conversations and we call on our elected officials to do something, to have city council hearings, to have community conversations, to hear about how this is affecting people and it's not right, it brings that power that we need to be able to make change.
To have those conversations requires a couple of things. Number one, right? I think that it requires people who are in the trenches, such as yourself, right?
Yeah.
Then when you get to the court system, there's something else, right? I need somebody in the courtroom that can understand what's going on and what's happening and not treat me like a name or a number or just this other guy that's an open manila file, right? That there has to be a level of cultural competence that is in the courtroom, that just because you passed the bar exam doesn't mean that you need to be representing me.
No. And that's the thing that I love about the Bronx Defenders. We often have heard jokes about, public defenders, we're just a name, just not a number, we're just a number, not a name to people. Some of the best attorneys that I know are public defenders. Because in order to be a public defender, you have to love the job. You have to love wanting to make an impact on someone's day-to-day, because we take a lot of losses, right? The system is not set up for public defenders to be able to get wins in the ways that are sustainable for people to be able to see that collective change that they need in their lives. And I say that to say that when we talk about public defenders, and again, we talk about due process, and in this country, you are constitutionally awarded an attorney, right? Meaning that you have a right to have an attorney and have someone defend you if you are in court, regardless of what you make, regardless of if you can afford them or not. So it's really important that we have public defenders and people fighting for the rights of people, especially when we have so many situations, and we see them every single day, where people are being accused of things that just aren't true.
Yeah. Barry Scheck, sat in the same seat that you sat.
Yes.
For those people who don't know, Barry Scheck, lawyer for the O.J. Simpson, also the Freedom, talks about and works with people who've been restored for after spending years in prison, have worked as a defender to get people out. He said, and I'll never forget, he said, lawyers have to be willing to go the extra mile.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. You have to be willing to fight for your client like it's yourself. And what I mean by that is when we are meeting someone, and I'm not an attorney, I work with all the attorneys, but when you're meeting someone who has just been arrested, you're seeing them at what possibly is the lowest moment of their lives. Meaning, nobody wants to get arrested. Nobody wants to deal with police officers. People want to enjoy life, have fun, etc. You have to be willing to meet people in that moment with the same compassion that you would want to be met with if you were in your worst moment in life. They are being accused of something that they have to now defend their right in society. And again, we talk about collateral consequences. The same way we know it on the legal end, this person is experiencing it day in and day out, just from an arrest, right? Just from that being the worst moment. What calls do they need to make to their family to try to set up circumstances around what their life is gonna look like after this arrest? So when we talk about going the extra mile, what lawyers do and what public defenders do is so important because you also want your client to know that you care. Right. To know that you did the work and you're not, you didn't just pass the bar and become attorney because you thought it would be cute. You did it because this is your life's work and this is how you want to give back.
You've sounded the alarm on several things that people need to pay attention to, and I want to talk about the public for a minute because they really help in shaping policy of the work that you do.
Yeah.
Many times getting across the finish line, the policy is written, but it takes the public to really advocate for that particular policy. Mm-hmm. In this current climate, how can the public help with some of the policy initiatives that you've got going on at the Bronx Defenders?
Yeah, so Congressmember Ayanna Pressley, she has one of my favorite quotes that I carry with me all the time, and she says the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power and the closest to the policy making. I always want to empower people, especially young people, to get involved, because if your voice didn't matter, they wouldn't try to silence it so much. Every issue that you have a problem with, it can be your sidewalk, it can be, over-policing in your community, it can be housing instability. There's someone else who's going through something just like you, and the system is counting on you all not to organize and get together and talk about it. So talking about it and getting together and organizing and having, lunch and learns or conversations over the dinner table is so imperative to just moving the work forward and getting involved in a way that it feels sustainable for you, right? I've dedicated my life to this work. I'm not expecting everybody to do so. If you can show up at a town hall, if you can show up at a PTA meeting, right? If you can show up at a community board meeting, if you can show up at an event that's happening in your community, all of those little touches matter. I don't want people to think that they have to do this grand old thing to get involved. Do what you can in the moment, and it'll grow, because it happens. But do what you can in the moment because it matters.
What should people be paying attention to now in this season?
Everything. And I say that because the Bronx Defenders, we're a holistic organization. Today, it's going to be immigration. Tomorrow, it's going to be housing, right? The next day, it's going to be bail reform. Everything has, everything is interconnected. Right. And what I mean by that is, for it to be housing one day, housing is always going to impact the criminal legal system. If it's food insecurity, that's always going to impact children, right? Everything is interconnected. So making sure that people are paying attention to obviously the things that are impacting them, but that are also impacting their neighbors as well, because the system, again, is counting on you to be kind of zoomed out and just information out, right? Just over everything, and you want to make sure that you're staying engaged.
Yeah, the information overload is high.
Yeah,
right?
It's very high.
We're dealing with it all the time. And, we just talked about arrest. I mean, I got to bring you back because we got to talk about housing. You know what I'm saying?
I would love to come back.
You got to come back. We'll get you back because I need to talk about housing because I think it's so important and so critical in a time like this.
Yeah.
All right, Brittany McCoy, she's been with us, and guess what? We're taking a quick break, but we got more right after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. 55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. %34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
And we are back through a combination of community service, leadership development, and advocacy. The Muslim Community Network is actively reshaping the public narrative surrounding the Muslim experience in the U.S., striving for a future where peace, justice, and inclusivity are at the forefront. Their commitment to bringing stronger communities through education and service continues to inspire and uplift. Joining me now is the Executive Director of the Muslim Community Network, Husein Yatabarry, and we thank you so much for joining us, Husein.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for having me. I feel like I was in your closet today.
Yeah, brother, you got it on, man. It's good. It's good to have you.
Good to have you. Good to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A lot of work that's going on, and a lot of work in terms of really feeding the community, being engaged with the community. And if you could share a little bit about, first of all, the Muslim Community Network.
Yeah, Muslim Community Network was started back in 2003 after 9/11, and our goal has been to redefine and shape the narrative around being Muslim in America. Like you said earlier, through three core pillars, which is community development, leadership development, and advocacy. And I think right now, like our organization, we're being tested with a lot when it comes to immigration, hate crime prevention, and just free speech rights when it comes to Muslim Americans and just all Americans and what they can say in opposition to the federal government. So I have staff members right now in Foley Square. The case of Mahmoud Khalil has been a large looming case that's caught national media attention. And these are all things that we're fighting to combat.
A lot of work that's going on in, things from food insecurity to criminal justice, social justice, really doing that. How have you been able to address, you talked about 9/11, and there's been this Islamophobia hike since 9/11, and we know that. And for our brothers and sisters in the Muslim community, obviously, a lot of unjust and unwarranted eyes. What's it been like, and what's the Islamophobia been like for you, particularly recently?
Yeah, I think specifically we had a case in Kensington, Brooklyn, where a mosque, there was a man outside of a mosque that was producing hate speech on a megaphone. So connecting with that mosque in order to see what they need, we're actually setting up an advocacy iftar with them, along with Councilwoman Shana Hanif's office, and JFREJ, Jewish for Economic Justice, and trying to kind of build that bridge and build a support system around mosque and community members so that because they might not know access to all the resources that they are entitled to. So making sure that nonprofits and orgs like ours are able to come in, tell them the actual things that they have access to and how they can combat whenever these kind of scenarios do happen. We're doing diversity education with outside communities to make sure they understand more about Muslim communities and the cultures which people come from. And then also we're doing the hate crime prevention within our own Muslim community so people also understand how to be a good upstander. And like we also do teach some self-defense classes to people that are like scared or may have been victim to hate crimes in the past and want to make sure they're able to physically defend themselves if ever in those scenarios. So it's some defense and then some offense in trying to make sure like we're pushing to outside communities what it means to be Muslim, especially in this month of Ramadan that we're in, making sure people really understand what Ramadan is about and the message of Islam.
Yeah. For you, how's it been, given the fact that we're in this heightened society? We know that, Islamophobia is real, but then you walk the streets of New York City. We understand just a few miles away, we are from the former World Trade Center. And yet and still, for a lot of New Yorkers, that's very visible, that's very real. And for those in the Islamic community, Islamophobia is something that they incur on a daily basis. Have you found possibly that things have gotten better?
I think it's ebbs and flows. There are times when things do get better. I think it all depends on the rhetoric. And I think when you have time periods in American society when the rhetoric is tame, I think that Muslim communities do feel better. But I think in this current federal administration, the rhetoric is more heightened against pro-Palestinian or whatever people want to label Muslims that may be active on the civic scene or the protest scene, and it does breed some more hate. I definitely do believe international affairs play a big part. So I would say everything that is happening in Gaza has a huge role to play in like the increased Islamophobia that has reared its head. And I think we are at an inflection point with the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia student who is being detained, is a permanent resident, and is being held because of free speech and the things that he has said. And he's being detained and potentially going to be deported. I mean, the court case is going on today, but then it does split society into camps when it shouldn't be that way. We have First Amendment rights, but those are being trampled on. If you dare speak out against a government, then there will be Islamophobia that will be pushed onto the public.
Yeah, Islamophobia is huge, and it's certainly something that too many people have to contend with. I do want to talk about bridging the gap, though, because when we talk about bridging the gap, one of the great ways is through diversity. And I know the D word is not a great word on the part of those in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but right here, it's a good word. And I believe there's a lot that can be learned through diversity. You also engage in diversity education. Can you share with our viewers a little bit about the diversity education that the Muslim Community Network engages in and what you've seen as a result?
Yeah, so we work with different corporations, schools, government agencies, and we take them through our diversity education curriculum, which is in three parts. It's understanding Muslim diversity and cultures, a deep dive into Islamophobia, and then lastly, how to connect with Muslim communities and families. So it's a three-part. It's understanding the community, how the root of the Islamophobia and the stereotypes that you may have internally, and then how do you then connect with those families now that you know that you did have some preconceptions about these communities and you didn't really understand them before. And we've just seen wonders, especially at the school level, whether it's public schools or college campuses, and also private schools, where people are like, oh, I didn't know that's why this was happening, or I didn't know how to connect with my students during Ramadan, or I didn't know how to connect with their families, or I didn't know why the mothers did not engage in these events, but only the fathers did. So kind of understanding some of the cultural nuances of different communities, but then also the religious aspect of it, because they're not the same. They're very separate. Just like any major religion, you have multiple denominations, and within those denominations, based on where they're from in the world, it's going to be practiced a little bit differently. So you will have more like orthodox versus more liberal, progressive kind of wings of different denominations. And I would say it's really come away with the diversity education, and it's also really helped build some bridges with other communities. I do feel like there is a lot of solidarity with other communities. And like we've been bridging gaps even with our counterparts in Jewish communities, organizations like JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, and JFresh. Those have been great partners of ours during this time period when there is a lot of division and people are starting to stoke fires, where we're connecting with other Christian members of communities as well, whether it's Methodist churches or Baptist churches. And at the end of the day, the goal is peace. The goal is human rights and standing up for human rights, and making sure people are able to speak freely, live freely, and love freely. And I think that's the main goal of diversity education. And we're seeing some steps happening in that direction. And like you said, with the federal administration, it's difficult because states and municipalities are scared to fund diversity efforts nowadays because they might get their funding shut off. So it's actually like organizations have to step outside of government and getting government assistance to push diversity education to communities because the federal government um, might retaliate against them for pushing diversity efforts.
Yeah. What's going on today is the network is doing some great work. Also, feed the community during Ramadan. I want to get an opportunity for you to have you share a little bit about that.
Of course. So today and every Wednesday of Ramadan. So this is today, March 12th, March 19th, March 26th, on the mosque on 222 East 97th Street, Islamic Cultural Center of New York. We distribute 500 meals for everyday New Yorkers, migrant communities, working New York communities. They all come to that mosque to receive free meals. We're in partnership with the Comptroller's Office and Islamic Relief USA. These are nutritious meals, usually rice and some kind of protein. We even have vegan options with falafel. Usually has a couple dates inside your bag and like a water bottle. So like it's a full kit. So as soon as you pray Maghrib, you break your fast. The meal's called iftar. You have your iftar, and it's called iftar on the go. So you can have it and take it out of the mosque, and maybe some people are cab drivers or delivery workers. You can eat your meal outside, or you can eat your meal in the mosque itself. But it's a wonderful time to connect with communities, and we have so many non-Muslims that also volunteer with us in order to do the distributions. Also throughout the month, we also host food pantries in multiple boroughs where we're giving produce for households. And that's because our households are cooking large feasts and large meals for suhoor, which is in the morning at sunrise when people stop eating, and then for iftar at sunset when they break their fast. So families are doing this constant cooking. So we're going to different boroughs and we're partnering with different food pantry partners in order to provide these fresh produce and fresh goods and sometimes some fresh eggs because we know the price of that and how families appreciate having those things for free.
For yourself, what is the most gratifying part of all of this?
Being able to empower my community. I think growing up, I've been part of a community that has been alienated. I've been part of a community that is always in constant fear. And I think that community is finding its voice in 2025 and is finding ways to speak up for itself. But I'm also hopeful seeing other communities stand with us and say, like, the Muslim community is a good community. They're an American community and they're part of our fabric. And there is no separation between them and us. It's just an us. And I think that's what we have to really come to. There's just an us. And we have to stand up for each other. We have to make sure our neighbors are safe. We have to make sure our neighbors are comfortable. And when they're not, we stand up for our neighbors. And just being part of that process, that makes me feel good. And I'm hoping to hear good things today from our solidarity movements down by City Hall, at the courthouses, and making sure Mahmoud Khalil is free.
I don't want to, this could take 20 minutes. I only have about 3, but I just want to get to you before we wrap up. The present political climate, what has that meant for you as an organization? And how has that, pretty much affected you in the work that you do, given the fact that there is so much anti-rhetoric that's coming out of federal government?
It makes the work extremely difficult, I would have to say. The onslaught of executive orders, the onslaught of the Secretary of State getting involved in local matters. I think if we're being very reactive right now. It's hard to be proactive when there's something new every single day. Whether it's tariffs that affect families and their homes on the affordability crisis, whether it's the anti-DEI efforts that's trying to show division within our society, whether it's anti-immigrant efforts that is also showing division in our societies and making people fearful, affecting the economy, affecting our national security, and the fundamental values of free speech. You cannot, in this 2025 society, say negative things around the federal government, or you are in fear. Even myself, like in our organization, we have to be careful with our criticism because your funding can get cut off, and then you have to pay your employees. These are all things that organizations fear. That's very scary when this nation has been built on some fundamental values. But if you're not within a specific camp and you're not bowing down to powers that be, your funding can get shut off. You can be under investigation and surveillance, and everything that you have worked for within your community can be for naught. So I think in this time period, us all standing together in solidarity and saying, hey, you cannot infringe upon our rights, and we must stand together to make sure our government is working for us. But it seems like nowadays we're supposed to work for our government, which doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, I got to leave it there, but I want to tell you this. The work that you're doing is definitely impactful. I want to continue to salute you for that. And hopefully, as we are living in this climate, there'll be more tolerance and more understanding. But I really appreciate the fact of knowing that, the diversity education that goes on, because I think that's the only way we're really going to make our society better is if we do take the time to have some diversity education. So I do want to take the opportunity to say thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. I end off by saying free Mahmoud Khalil, peace in Gaza, peace in Congo, peace in Sudan, peace all over the world. Blessings to everyone. And I'm just hoping that 2025, we start to see some more glimmers of hope and light within our communities.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining us here on the Social Justice Forum. I'm Daren Jaime. Take care.